Good evening and welcome to City Focus. I'm Marty Olsen, your host, and tonight I'm delighted to bring in two gentlemen who represent New London. They're both New London guys, and I'm tickled to have them in. One's a veteran of the cable airwaves.
It's been a while.
Rob Pirro, who's a longtime city councilor, did a term on the Board of Ed, and now serving, and this is what this program will be about, is in capacity as registrar voters on the Republican side, and a newbie we've got.
It's true.
Rich Martin, who runs the Telegraph downtown and a lot of other musical events, I might add. Very pro New London, and he's the Democratic registrar of voters, and you're new on the job.
Relatively speaking, yeah. In terms of Rob's term and Bill before me, yeah, I just started in December.
So you're less than a year, and filling in and taking the place of Bill Giesing, who's my next door neighbor, and Bill had that job a long time.
I think about 16 years.
That's a long time. Almost as long as you were on the council.
Yeah, Bill's a great guy.
Well, before we get into that, I've been asked to do a public service announcement for Tammy Millsaps, who's the girls basketball coach at New High School. She's running a basketball camp along with Kareem Brown, former Whaler star, and it's running from August 8th to the 11th at New London High School from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. daily. It costs $90, and payment can be made to Venmo, V-E-N-M-O, at NL Basketball. So if you've got youth that are interested in learning to find tips of basketball, this is a good opportunity to do so here in the Whaling City. And I'll give another plug to the New London Kiwanis Club. We've got our annual golf tournament coming up in September on the 16th. And we're looking for golfers and sponsors and donations, volunteers, and it's a good time can be had by all. Either you guys golf?
Mini golf. That's
mini golf.
Yeah, I'm a mini golfer. I mean, I used to try and play, but I get frustrated after so many holes. Well,
one of the benefits of this format is you play the best ball.
Best ball, right?
Somebody can get a ringer, you can just keep playing that ball.
What is it? August 19th?
It's September 16th.
Oh, September 16th.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's sneaking up.
Maybe we'll get a team going.
Right, there we go.
The
Registrars. That's right.
Well, I tell you, I'm pleased to have you guys in here. I think that we have an opportunity to offer some education to our community, and a lot of what you do, although it's localized, state statute dictates a lot of what you're doing as well. Am I correct?
That's correct. Right. Right. So I mean, we're under the auspices of the Secretary of State, right? So they're pretty much our bosses. I mean, we all in New London, we run for office through our respective town committees, whereas most of the state, you would run for office just like on anybody's on the ballot. People could vote for the office, but in New London particularly, we do it through the town committees, something that happened long ago. But and then we have basically a group, a consortium of registrar voters all throughout the state, and we try and work together, nonpartisan, to create best practices, right, for elections and working together. And so we try and follow those creeds and do education throughout the year, both in the spring and in the fall. So we're under the auspices of the Secretary of State. They give guidance, they give support. Sometimes they give answers that are like you flip a coin, but it's the best that you can hope for. And we try and work with a system that everybody feels comfortable with. So
yeah, I agree. Connecticut has it right, where I think we try to have a balance between the two parties so that there's no doubt about the outcomes here. And for the most part, from what I've seen, the safeguards are strong, and people should feel
You're very
confident.
comfortable with that, so there's no level of cynicism here in New London that our elections are misguided or mishandled.
I don't believe they are. I've not seen any sign of that. So I think our system in the state as a whole is pretty solid. I mean, there's obviously anything can be fixed and made better, and I think the state tries to do that regularly. But I think the balance between having the two parties working together in an office like this really is important.
All right, and also each town committee elects their registrar. So you were elected by the Democratic Town Committee, and you've been elected by the Republican Town Committee. And this is a paid job. This is not you're not volunteering. It's you get I don't think it's enough to retire on, but but there is a salary attached. I don't know if there's any. I don't think there's any benefits. It's just
No.
So, what motivated you to step up for this job when Bill's?
I've always loved politics, but I especially believe in the right to vote. I believe that it's something that's critical to the growth of our country, to the success of our country, and getting people to be engaged in the process is as important as serving in office. And so it fits with my ability to do the job. Having a small business, I don't think that I would have the time to be in office, but to do this work, it fits into my lifestyle and having a business downtown. So it's just the right fit at the right time in a way that I can be involved and have an impact to get people engaged in the system. So,
Now, you've been doing this for a while, and you also have an assistant.
Right. By statute, all registrars have to have a deputy, and so my deputy Shannon Brennick, who's great, she works. We share the duties pretty much. Whereas in some offices, the deputy might just be there because the statute requires it. If the registrar gets sick or unfortunately passes away, then somebody has to be there to take their place. In my case, the way I try to work it with Shannon is that we're there together. We're doing the same work together. We're understanding the training together because I work full-time job. She works another full-time job. But I think with what we used to do with Bill and now with Rich, I think we work well together in trying to fit the pieces together and sharing the hours. And just, I think sometimes also there's so much. Election laws are changing so much, requirements are changing so much, and to have 3 or 4 people that have a bullpen discussion about it, it's better than having a discussion with 1 or 2 people.
Yeah. Well, I know that when I registered to vote, which was before both you guys, back in prehistoric times, I mean, I had to take an oath. I mean,
right, I did too, actually.
Raise your right hand and do your duty. I don't think that's required anymore. And I also had to go to the registrar's office in City Hall to register. It was
right.
It was not quite as fluid as it is today.
Well, you can do it through the DMV now. If you go to get your license, they ask if you'd like to be registered to vote, and that automatically gets you into the system. So,
right.
It's a lot more accessible to people. So.
And I think I did the same thing when my mother, when I turned 18, she took me down to register to vote. I got sworn in. It was kind of very formal, and I got registered for the draft. I still had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like what Rich said is, I think there's the accessibility of being able to vote, right? And to being able to be registered to vote is more, right? Wherever you go, you can find a form, whether it be nonprofits, whether it be the DMV. I think that's been expansive and it's been helpful. Now, I think people have to take note is when they do go and get their license changed, they ask you if you want to register to vote, and a lot of people are already registered. So if you do fill out the information, you should check if you're registered with a party, a Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or Independent. If you don't check any of those, you automatically will be registered as an unaffiliated, meaning you're not registered with a party. Because there is a Libertarian Party, there is an Independence Party, spelled a couple of different ways in the state. So, so it's important to know that, because when people sometimes are coming up on this election now in August, you'll have to be in a particular party in order to vote, and that's the biggest thing where people may get turned away, and we don't want that to happen. So.
And that could happen. I mean, and somebody, I mean, the way you're outlining that is that you can almost anticipate that that will happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't think most of the DMV workers probably know to encourage people to sign on to the party that they have been with previously or would like to be in the future, and we end up with a lot of unaffiliated. That can be rectified at the polls, but if you do sign up for a party, you have to change, in order to vote in the primary you'd like to, you need to be part of that party 90 days before the election. So you can't just come to the polls on August 9th and change your affiliation and vote Democrat or Republican. So it is important.
Okay. Now, we do have, as you noted, a primary coming up on August 9th, which is a Tuesday, which is kind of standard day for elections. I wouldn't call the middle of summer in August a standard time.
No.
And this will be your first election?
It will. I mean, I worked a few with Bill, but the first as registrar, yes.
Yeah. So, well, you're the main man. You're in charge, for at least on that side of the. So what should people expect? What does with a primary? These are seats that are being contested within a party for a particular specific office. I mean, I believe the GOP, we've got 3 candidates seeking the U.S. Senate spot on the ballot to challenge the incumbent, Blumenthal.
That's correct.
How many primaries are there?
We have 2 on the Democratic side. There's Secretary of State and there's State Treasurer. So we don't have the national offices that the Republicans do. So a little bit different roles engaged there, but just the 2 for us. And so there's challengers to the candidate that was selected at the state convention. So you've got that top candidate, and then there's the challengers, who the primaries.
Now, are either of these offices, are they incumbents or are they all new?
They are all new. Yep. So we'll have complete turnover there. So yep.
And what other primaries might we have with the GOP beyond the U.S. Senate?
So yeah, U.S. Senate, you have Thamus Claridis running. You also have Lenora Levy, and you have Peter Lamage, and that's a seat to go up against Senator Blumenthal. Secretary of State, you have Dominic Rapini, who's the endorsed candidate from the convention. You also have Terry Wood, who's a state rep. And there was a third, Brock Weber, excuse me. He has withdrawn.
Oh, really? I was not aware of that. I mean,
He just withdrew, I think, last Friday. So,
he's in New Britain, isn't he? I mean,
yes, he's
involved with the mayor up there.
Correct. I believe he's like the administrative, or the whatever they call it up there, the chief executive officer maybe, and he's run campaigns. But yeah, he withdrew on Friday. We had already printed our ballots in the city of New London, and so the Secretary of State's office here, where we were talking about guidance previously, gave us some guidance as to what we could do. We could reprint the ballots, which would be a cost to the taxpayers of the city of New London, and also memory cards, which are the ones that go into when you slip your ballot in, it reads the ballot, which would cost additional money. So we've decided to just cross out his name. So if you're a Republican going in to vote in New London on April 9th, you'll probably see an X through one of the candidates' name, and that's Brock Weber, because we're not going
That's
to.
being done by hand.
Correct.
Which is not ideal, but it is also not just in New London. Municipalities all over the state have the same issue. I mean, this is a very late withdrawal, so it's unfortunate, but I think it'll still be a fair election.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I was surprised. I mean, I've met Brock. He seemed pretty gung-ho, but...
He got in the race. I think he was the first one in the race. And then I think Rapini followed after. But I think it might have been because I think he got qualified for the CEP late, the state monies. And maybe he just figured he was behind. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, with the primary, and you mentioned the ballots, are absentee ballots available?
They are now.
They are now.
August 19th. I'm sorry, July 19th, which was what, yesterday? Or,
Yesterday or today?
so it's 21 days before an election, before a primary that they're available. I think it's 31 now.
And that's by law, state law?
Yes. Right. So there is a state elections calendar if you're really interested in this stuff. And we were supposed to do a talk with one of the local high schools, but they kind of got pushed back earlier this year with one of the local high schools, and they pushed us off their schedule. But one of the things is that there is a state elections calendar that kind of basically dictates all of this. And so if you want to follow along, you can print that off and just put in Google State Election Calendar Connecticut 2022, and it'll tell you what are the requirements. So, pretty fun stuff.
It's very exciting reading. It's page turner.
Right, exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, historically, when it comes to primaries, I mean, it's the avid folks that are into politics that get out and participate. I mean, it's too bad that more people don't.
Yeah.
But in Connecticut, where you have to be affiliated with a party and can only vote in that party's primary.
Exactly.
Other states have different rules and different laws.
They have open primaries, right, where you can
You can
go
vote
in
either
the day.
way. Unaffiliated or independents can
Right.
participate. So for a large segment of the population or the electorate, I mean, if they're not affiliated with the party, they're unable to participate.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you're an unaffiliated voter right now, you could switch to a party. You could Republican or Democrat and vote on August 9th. Now, it's not the gubernatorial, it's not senatorial, only on the Republican side. But if you're that amped up, you can still. There's still time. By mail, I believe it's the 26th of July, and then you can walk in and provide it the day prior to August 9th at 12 o'clock noon.
Yeah. Now, with the primary, do you have the same day registration? Is that? I mean, we have that on the.
No same day registration.
Yeah, that's something that, quite frankly, I don't like. Period. But that's just me.
Why don't you like that?
Why don't I like it? Because I think it allows to kind of corral people by the ear and drag them in, and they may not really have much of an interest in what's
Invested
going
interest.
on, and well, you may be getting less than informed people who are participating. Legally, I guess they can, but not everybody who goes to vote is informed anyway. I mean.
Well, yeah, not everybody who's currently registered is as informed as we'd like them to
I
be.
mean, I don't know if we want to go down that path,
Maybe that's
but it's I just don't like it. But that's just one man's opinion, and I'm on the short end of the stick on that one. And, for many years on the council, I know what it's like to be on the short end of the stick.
Right.
Swimming against the tide regularly. So, what can people expect with the primary in terms of what to expect when they get to the polling booth? I mean, are the same polling places? You mentioned we've got our districts have been changed a little bit.
Right.
So some folks may show up where they're accustomed to voting and find out that that's not where they do vote.
Well, that's, I think, one thing that Shannon and Rich were working on. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, well, there's a postcard that's going out next week to all households who had their polling place changed because of redistricting that will notify them of their new district and where that is. I can't say how many voters. Do you
I think it
know
was
that
about
number?
1,000 households,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
So you'll get a notification of that. You can also go on our website, and we're going to have a list of the streets, so that you can look up your street and figure out what district it is if you want to confirm that. You can also go to some sites like vote411.org. It's a really useful site for the whole country, and you can put in Connecticut, and brings you to the right page where you can just put in your name or your address and figure out where you vote if you've got any doubts at all. So there's a lot of great resources out there just to confirm. But some people may go to their old polling places and they will not be on that list, and we will have to send them to another polling place to vote. So hopefully that there's not too many who haven't heard that their polling places have changed, but that would be the process.
Yeah.
I think in some of the communities they're putting it up on their website, or they're not sending out postcards, and I think it was one of the things that we felt strongly about was to send postcards, but we did it to households instead of individual voters. So that way, we're trying to make sure we're not squandering any of the hard-earned taxpayers' dollars, but also informing the public as to the potential changes for them, so that they go into the right polling place. So there's still currently 3 polling locations. The high school, the STEM Magnet High School, Harbor School, and Nathan Hale. So most of the changes took place in the 2nd and 3rd district, Harbor School and Nathan Hale. I don't believe we had anything in the 1st district. So that's, and these changes were state mandated. So every 10 years, every 10 years you have redistricting, right? So you have to balance the population. So if it's based upon the census tracts. So they have to balance the House district seats they're supposed to be doing it based upon the population size. Some of it, New London used to be carved up in 3 different House seats. Yeah. Now we're currently in 2, and so I think they made it more along the shoreline type of thing with the 40th now. I think it's the 40th, right? We used to be the 41st. So you're going to be getting a new state rep in that if you live in the southern end of New London, pretty much, because Mr. Delacruz is not in that seat. He's not running again, and Christine Connolly, who's in Groton, will be running for that seat, who's the incumbent, and then I forget who the Republican candidate is. So whatever way it is, you're going to have a new representative. So
now, that's for sure. I'm just trying to think that you do have the every 10 years, and that's mandated by the Assembly in Hartford. Don't they have a final approval on the districts? or the redistricting?
Well, there's a committee that is appointed by the legislature, right? And so the legislative committees, it's supposed to be nonpartisan, and they will draw the lines, right? And so they drew the lines, and I think they pretty much agreed on the legislative and the senatorial ones. They did not necessarily agree on the congressional ones, and then it went to court. And that's why I think you have a late appeal going on right now in the 1st congressional district, where I think there was a challenge that had taken place. I haven't followed it that much, but the congressional
is that in the Hartford area, the 1st district?
I believe it is, if I recall correctly, because I think the 4th is down by Greenwich. It used to be the 5th. Now there's only 4, I believe, right? So the courts had to decide as to how they were going, if they agreed with the committee as to how they put these towns into which district, and they then hire this guru, if you will, that has done it throughout the country, that basically looks at how states do this redistricting, so they're not, gerrymandering, right? So they're not basically trying to put a definite Republican, area or a Democratic area for a particular seat. So it's supposed to be.
I have a hard time believing.
Yeah, well, we have all four seats in Connecticut are Democrat, but I don't, in other states you have, like Texas or, Wisconsin or certain places, you're going to get so many seats, and it's done by both parties. So
sure is.
That is true.
So
that is true. Now, with the primary, it's not the office of the registrar to generate interest in the election. That's up to the political parties. You just run the election.
That's true. I mean, I think we're there to make people aware of their rights to vote and how to do it and how to register and where to vote once they are registered. So, I mean, there's a little bit of cheerleading that goes on there in terms of how do you engage the process. But it's, we're not driving people out to vote for candidates. We're
And there are
letting them
rules
know
around the
about-
polling places. I mean, you can't
have to
come
be
in
75
vote,
feet
vote
away.
for me
Yeah.
walking in through the poll.
Well, and our workers can't have any kind of regalia on supporting a candidate, and the goal is still for people to vote, and I think that is part of the office. I mean, that's why we engage with the schools once or twice a year to make sure that they know how to do that and why it's important. So I wouldn't say that we're not driving people to vote, but we're not driving people to vote for specific parties or candidates.
Yeah. Now the amount of poll workers it requires to run an election means you guys just don't do it yourselves. There are
Right.
people at the polls, and these are paid positions for the day.
Right. It's a long day.
It's a very long day.
The polls open at
6 a.m.
Yeah, they have to
and
be
they
there a
close.
little after 5. And
Right. So you're talking about maybe 5 a.m. To 9 p.m. Well, or later in some
assuming
cases.
it all goes well.
Right. So I mean, and that's a long day, and So when people are talking about nefarious things that they might see, I mean, there's human error, there's human lack of sleep or whatever. I mean, so I think there's always this is like what we were based on, right? This is our system that we always looked up to, and that we're free, and we have this system where everybody can come out and make their voice heard or their vote heard, and so we're about access, right? We're about access to making sure people have awareness of voting, and I think Rich alluded to that with the going to the schools this year and letting our youth know about their access. And I think it's also making sure we have that information coming in from the DMV and it's correct, and then just making sure that we have, a good website and getting better about that. The council had challenged us a little about, you raised that argument, is it our job to make sure that more people go out and vote? And that was my argument back was, well, I think people come out based upon policies and things that are being discussed. So it's our job to make sure that they have the availability to some of those things. And I think that's, the balance, if you will, in some cases. So.
but the requirement for keep the polls functioning properly.
Right.
It's like a general election. I mean, you're not having less personnel. You still need to have a moderator. You still need to have the different functions
That's right.
tended to, even though you get a significantly smaller level of participation.
That's true. Yeah, it still
So the
costs the same.
expense is pretty much almost fixed.
It is, yeah. The only thing that will change is potentially the number of ballots that we might order, be expecting a lower turnout potentially for a primary. I mean, we know that the whole electorate isn't going to vote because some are registered for other parties that aren't participating in the primary, so that number might come down, and so there's a little bit of savings there. But we have a head moderator, we've got checkers and ballot clerks and machine tenders, and one from each
Assistant
party
registrars,
in most situations. So yeah, the expense remains the same even though it's a smaller turnout.
Yep.
I think the elections in Connecticut changed along, when you had the ballot shortage. I think it was in Bridgeport or New Haven, where they didn't order enough ballots, and that's when we have to get certified now as registrars. So we have to go through courses in order to be certified to be registrars, and it's through UConn, and they've done all this education, which is a good thing, because before I think a lot of this stuff was, kind of made up, or standard operating procedure was kind of what you made up with the other registrar, as opposed to it being a standard operating procedure for the whole state.
Right.
So those SOPs have gotten better as time has gone on, which is a good thing for the voter as well as for the system.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we got a call, so we're going to go to the phones. Good evening, and you're on the air.
Hey, Marty, thanks for taking my call. I came in late to the program, and there was some talk about redistricting or something to do with 2nd and 3rd District with Nathan Hale and Harbor School. What is that impact for the recent Connecticut congressional redistricting, or what's the impact on that? I kind of came in late to the program when you were discussing it.
I think the only thing that's impacting is it wasn't impacting who you're still going to be in the 2nd congressional district for Congress. It would only impact whether or not you were in the 39th as opposed to the 40th district. So
State rep.
the state rep seats,
yeah.
right? And I think a lot of some of the areas were along the Niles Hill and on up, and some of it was along Pequot Avenue. I think it's now all the 3rd district, whereas some of it used to be chopped up into the 2nd. So I don't have the map in front of me. I don't remember it as well, but everything along the waterfront now is pretty much the 3rd district. Right. And even up until the 1st, but there's no homes where it's been changed over.
State Pier Road.
State Pier Road, right.
And the Waterfront Park is now part of the 3rd district, but there's no residents down there.
So if you were impacted, you'll be getting a card from the city probably next week to let you know.
Because it just doesn't make sense when they went through doing all the redistricting, why they just didn't decide to make all in New London the 39th.
Well, that's a question. I was going to thank you, because I was going to bring that up. I mean, a lot of folks question why is New London cut up?
For years now, the 3rd district is pretty much forgotten. We're not part of New London unless it's for taxes. But when it comes to state representation, whoever's over in Groton, whatever, the only time we see them over at this part across the river was when they're up for re-election, if they have somebody they're running against.
Yeah, and that's decided by this committee that's appointed by the legislature, and then it.
Well, I understand that, but when they did it, they said the person that's now our representative is further away than the guy before.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean.
More like in Stonington in that area, at least where when Dela Cruz or whoever was the rep, it was like Groton. Now we're further into. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, and I mean the same thing
it's
is
one of the reasons you have a division in the city of New London.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's done politically in a lot of instances, and that's what it is. It's a system that was developed a long time ago that's kind of been, more political than it's meant to be. I think that's across the country.
So what about as far as like on for Paul Formica's former seat?
Nothing. I don't think.
Is that anything changing there?
Nothing's changed.
Well, not in New London. I don't know about any of the other communities, but not in New London.
Potentially in other communities, but I'm not sure actually.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
I don't.
Okay. Well, thank you for the call.
I don't know that.
This gentleman was
other
very
towns.
interested in what's going on in the community. Calls the program.
I'm it's intriguing, how these decisions get made. I mean, I don't think that there's consultation on the local level as to how it's going to impact the community. It comes down to us, and then we deal with it. We redistrict, and then it sort of happens to us. It's not something that we're part of the dialogue, unless potentially our representatives are sitting on that committee.
Yeah. I mean, the 39th, and I think the caller had a reasonable point. Why doesn't New London have its own rep? We're not that big of a community.
And that's
the
why.
39th it's been constituted for the past 35, 40 years. I mean, it's.
In some ways, it could be considered a good thing for our community, though, that we have more representation up there. Within the community, it creates a divide, but there is an argument to be made that there's more people up there who are hopefully fighting for New London's needs. But whether that happens or not.
I've heard that argument. I don't necessarily subscribe to it, but in that, and I like to kind of tease a little bit that the 39th is set up where the Republicans could run Abe Lincoln or Ronald Reagan and would lose to whomever the Democrats put up. I mean, it's that heavily weighted in registration, which is your business.
Yeah.
It's.
I ran for the 39th one, so I mean, it was really close.
Well, you ran maybe the most competitive race for that seat.
Yeah.
You ran against Wade, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, it was one of my first entries into politics. It was a fun race, and I think what we have to get back to is, in looking at it from this side, not as a candidate is, and as a voter, elections are supposed to be about ideas. They're supposed to be about ideas that shape our community to be the better. And that, I think, we've gotten into, well, there's so many of whether they be R's or D's, I can't win, as opposed to I have great ideas. I'm going to let those be a sounding board for this election. And even if I don't win, those ideas may carry the day. And I think that's what we have to get back to, is people who run for the purposes of the ideas as opposed to winning and losing. And I've lost, and I know how it is to lose and to put your heart and soul into it, but there's also a satisfaction in knowing that you ran for the fact that the ideas continue. So I'd like to see that. I mean, maybe I'm an idealist, I don't know, but I just think that's a good thing, and something we need to get back to in a lot of places.
Well, I think that's that pure look at things is a way we ought to go. I
Right.
mean, and it's up to the candidates to make that happen, quite
Right.
frankly.
Right.
Yeah.
Whomever's running in whatever city or town and whatever party they're representing.
Yeah, and have it build from the grassroots up instead of, from your news station down. It's wherever you get your feed.
Right. Exactly, right.
And that's changed radically over the years too. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been involved. I first got involved in the mid 1980s, and at that time locally, I mean, the council was covered by the Day and the Bulletin, WNLC. 102.3 FM, I forget their call letters at the time, and Channel 26 was active, and they'd come in for some bigger issues. And you don't have that level of competition anymore. I mean, the Day barely is able to even get a reporter in to cover something, never mind cover
Right.
everything.
It's true.
Right.
So the public is not getting as well informed
Right.
It's true.
on what's going on. And
I
that's
agree
not
with that.
healthy.
No,
No.
that's not good at all. And so I think, with everything changing in our lives, voting is changing as well. And I think one of the things that voters are going to have in November to look at is, right now you can vote by absentee, right? And so if you were to vote by absentee prior to COVID, there was seven or eight reasons, I forget the number. But were you going to be absent from the town, your physical disability, were you an election official, and I forget some of the other ones. And you had to fit one of those categories technically in order to vote by absentee. If you did it because you didn't want to go to the polls and you got away with it, okay, but that was what was required by law. So now on the ballot coming in November, I believe, is a no excuse absentee. So it'll be a constitutional question as to whether or not you want to do away with that. If you were to vote yes, I believe that means you want to do away with those requirements or those fitting into those 8 categories. And then 2 years from now, we'll be voting on whether or not you want to have early voting. I think it's 2 years from now. I think it's in 2024.
Early
Is
voting
that at the state
second
level?
one?
I mean, everybody
Right.
would be voting on that?
I believe it's 2024. I
Because
forget.
that-
Because
being
it's in our
one, then it would be- it would
they have to
be-
open our constitution up to change the voting laws. So in order to adopt early voting, for instance, or to make this change permanent with absentee voting, you have to have a referendum that goes to all of the people to open the constitution up again. So, so we'll be voting on whether early voting is an option or not. And though we don't quite know what early voting
Looks like.
looks like. They haven't defined that. It's just a term, and then we'll determine we'll vote for the term and then decide what that means for the state. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, at a personal level, I think the more liberal, and I don't use that term very often, absentee voting makes sense. If somebody would prefer not to go to the poll, they can vote absentee. Why are we holding that back? As long as they go through the process of absentee voting and not just getting something in the mail that everybody gets flooded with. That I'm not quite so sure I
that works in some states though, where the ballots go out, and if you choose to vote, it's just made it one step easier to engage the process. So. To me, it makes a lot of sense that all you're doing is, it's similar, it's a next step beyond just registering the person. It's like, well, here's your ballot, and the drop box, you know where it is, and you can drop it off, or you can put it in the mail, and if it lands by a certain time. So it's not quite as evil as it sounds.
I'm not as comfortable with it as you are, but that's part of our system of government.
This
We have
is
an
true.
opportunity to discuss these things.
Now, I think the constitutional question, I think it was either in 14 or it was in 16, was voted down by the voters for whatever reason. They chose not to take that requirement of giving a reason away. So we're back, 8 years later on the same question.
I mean, a lot of stuff got because of COVID. I mean, the
Right.
rules and regs were kind of
Relax. Well, it changed a little.
It changed. didn't
Right.
it?
yeah. I mean, and not necessarily with due process. It was just done because of the pandemic to make it voting more accessible.
Right.
Now, how does it work with folks that are incapacitated or in nursing homes, or maybe they're homebound? How do they vote?
So there is a requirement that if you're at a nursing home and the nursing home is in your community, and there's a certain number of, I think it's 20 or more,
20,
right?
Yeah.
That you would have to have supervised absentee balloting, meaning you would go there and you could probably call ahead of time and see what voters would want to vote and have them provide them the absentee ballot request form. They would fill that out, and then you would have somebody from either party there give them the ballot. They would then vote. If they needed assistance in any way, you could provide them that assistance. They would then, sign the document, put it in, and you then take it back. Now, the governor has, I believe, suspended absentee ballot, supervised absentee balloting for this primary. From what I remember, he just did it
Just
week
a
or
few
so.
days, yeah, like
He
recently.
has that authority to do that by
Yeah.
executive fiat.
I guess he does.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so there won't be any supervised absentee. I mean, they can
I think
choose
it can
to.
still happen, though.
Well,
It's
they
just not a requirement anymore.
Yeah, it's not a requirement. I mean,
So
they could still
They could still request it and we could
request a
provide it,
ballot, and
yeah.
we could send it out. I mean, you have enough time right now where if somebody so chose to vote, they have, we're 18 days away from a primary, so.
But
they
then
still
there's
have
also people who are just incapacitated, but they're in their own domiciles, and they can request a permanent absentee ballot.
Correct.
Right. So that means that they're on a list, which it's updated annually. We check in with them, but they are able to get on this list so that they do receive an absentee ballot every year without question.
Right, so they wouldn't have to fill out a form every
And
time.
that's a relatively new concept, correct?
I don't think it's relatively new. I think it's.
I like it. I just was.
You would need a doctor's note to be provided to the city clerk, and we're required to send out letters just to make certain those individuals are still living at that location. So I think there's 8 or 9 that we have on our list. I mean, it's not a big number, but it's something that I don't think people are always aware of, and like shows like this, talking
help
about
get
it,
the word
it's get the word out, right?
Now, the how is it handled if you've got folks that are, how do I phrase this? They're not necessarily all there, for lack of better words. I mean, they're just not. They're intellectually. got some issues
Everybody
or
has the
whatever.
right to vote unless it's been withdrawn by the state. I think it would
Right.
have to be through a judicial edict that
Right.
they don't have the right to vote any longer.
Correct.
Yeah. So,
And what would-
but
what-
until
what-
that's
what-
happened,
and
then,
what would trigger that? That's kind of where I was trying to. I mean, you really handled it nicely. Thank you.
well, that's about as far as I go with it. Though I don't know personally what would cause somebody to get into a situation like that and how they would get into a judicial situation.
So it'd probably be most likely through probate that somebody would initiate that,
Yes.
I would think, and that determination would be made by a probate judge that that person lacks the capacity. But I think it would extend more just beyond voting for other things, right? They wouldn't just be there for that. I mean, I haven't seen many circumstances. I've heard it talked about in the classes that we've taken, and I haven't really seen an example of it in actual, one where I've been involved in to say that how it's gone from A to Z. So, and quite frankly, I don't know that I'd want to be, because that's a particular sad scenario, right? That's person.
It's dicey. I mean,
Yeah.
who wants to have that kind of responsibility?
Right.
Yep. So we certainly don't make that determination. If they're able to get to the polls and their name is on the list, they are able to vote. Or if they do the proper steps to get an absentee ballot, then that's all we're there to do, is make sure that their vote is cast.
Now, how do we deal with address changes, whether it be within the community or folks moving in or out of the community? I mean,
Well, a lot of that happens through DMV now. So somebody will change their license, and we get notified digitally, through the systems that we work on, that they've changed, and so we will update their voter information.
that's done in your office.
We do the final step. We confirm that
Right.
information. Yeah.
And the other way is, we just don't work around November time. So in our office during those other downtimes, we're doing like a canvas. So we're required to send out mailings to, a canvas is basically going through to make sure our voter rolls are, you hear the word clean or whatever. So we'll go, you either can do a door-to-door one, which is pretty,
Onerous.
yes, that was the word I was going to use. You can do a mailing, which we get a list from the postal of change of addresses, both in town and out of town. So we'll have, maybe let's say 1,000 people who've moved out, and we'll do a mailing, or 1,000 people in town that have changed their addresses. So once we get that notification, we'll change it in our system through the Canvas piece, and then once we get notification from them, it'll cycle into our system. So if you don't respond to the Canvas and nothing ever comes back, you'll go to an inactive status, and that's done at the state.
Even if you vote every year, you would become inactive if you don't send that in?
If your address had changed, if we've gotten notification that your address has changed.
Right.
Not if, you didn't change addresses, and that's information is through the Postal Service. So it's a pretty legitimate authority, right? You're
And
getting
that doesn't mean you can't vote. That just means you're on an inactive list, and you would have to provide some sort of proof of, residency, and you're able to vote at the polls right there.
right.
I mean, and some people people are busy, and changing of address, voting may not be a priority in terms of, let's say, their job or their families,
Right.
food.
Right.
They show up to vote wherever they
And,
are. Well, I'm registered to vote, but
You can always fill out a registration card at the polling place if there's any doubt. The system sort of trusts you
Right.
that you are true in what you're saying, and you have the opportunity to get that registration card in at the polling place. Now, I'm not sure about with primaries because of the party. Depends on if you were. I'm not sure on that, but you can rectify that pretty quickly and at the polling places in most situations. So.
And I think one of the things that you talked about earlier is, if they're in inactive status, that means that they just have to fill out a registration card to make themselves active, and then we can make them active that day. Whereas, you reference same day registration, it's similar if somehow they moved out of New London but then came back and just hadn't happened to register. They have that ability, whereas previous to same day, you had, I think, a week in between. You had to register a week before the election. And it is tough, I will say, that, on compiling all these lists, it is very difficult to keep track. I mean, we have, 14,000, 15,000 registered
15,000.
voters. So we're trying to keep track of every, people who have passed away. We're looking at that information. We're now getting better information from the city clerk's office as to, monthly people who pass away. So we've got to go in there and take them off, right? And make sure they're not on there for any extended period, because that's not a good thing, right? And that doesn't build confidence. But one thing in New London, and I think that Bill started, was we are one of 8 or 9 towns that has the ability to have a voter checklist program. So you go in, you provide your information, we check you off through our computer system, and parties will have access to that information, so they can be looking to call people to say, hey, remember, it's today's the day to vote, so they can have accurate information as to who's voting. And so I see you have a couple calls.
Well, I'm not sure.
Oh, no?
Well, we're going to try. Good evening, you're on the air. We're down to our last minute.
I wanted to know who that other person is with Robert Tyrrell.
Well, we got Rich Martin and Rob Pirro, and I'm Marty Olsen.
Well, I don't really know who he is, the other guy, with a person.
That's Rich. Rich Martin.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, I don't know who that guy is. I just know Pirro, that's all I know.
How are you? Good to see you.
Robbie.
How are you?
Connie Judson.
I remember your voice. You used to call my show all the time.
Yeah, the remodeling Huntington Towers.
I know you do.
Now they're remodeling Huntington Towers. They got new Spanish people.
So, you know, Rich has a store downtown. Go visit his store, record store. You can see him every day.
Who's that?
Rich.
Mr. Pirro?
No, Rich Martin.
I know Mr. Pirro.
All right.
All right, thank you.
care.
Thank you.
But I know more than you, Mr. Olsen.
Thank you. All right, well, listen, we're out of time here. We're going to have the credits up. Thank you for calling. That's what makes life interesting here on live TV. But I want to thank you guys for coming out. I think we had an informative program. We hit on a lot of topics, and hopefully we get reasonable turnouts on the 9th,
Yeah.
and a
Thanks
little
for
bit
having
more
us.
excitement for November.
Yeah.
November 8th, I guess, is the general election.
It's the big one.
All righty. Gentlemen, again,
Thank you,
much.
Marty.
Thank you, Marty.
All righty,
Appreciate you
guys.
having us.
You bet. Good night, folks. You've been watching City Focus. We'll see you next week.